Before dawn, the quiet town of Maple Hollow, Tennessee, lay wrapped in fog. The streets were empty, the street lamps humming softly, and the only sound was the rhythmic tap of sneakers against asphalt. It was April 14, 2010, and Amanda Frazier, a 28-year-old nurse and avid runner, had set out for her usual pre-sunrise jog, the same 5-mile loop she'd done for years. At 5:12 a.m., a neighbor's security camera caught a fleeting silhouette. Amanda jogging past with her ponytail bouncing, a reflective armband flashing once in the dim light. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. When the sun rose an hour later, her fiancé, David Morrow, woke to find the bed cold beside him. Amanda was never late returning. Her running shoes weren't by the door, and her phone still lay charging on the nightstand. He assumed she'd stopped for coffee with a friend. By noon, when her hospital called asking why she hadn't clocked in, David's worry turned to dread. By sunset, hundreds of volunteers had gathered near the trail entrance, calling her name into the thick woods. Helicopters hovered overhead, search dogs sniffed every ditch, and the local sheriff's office combed through every nearby home with Amanda's photo in hand. But Amanda had vanished without a trace, no struggle, no clues, no scent trail, nothing. And for 10 long years, Maple Hollow would live under that shadow, until a drone pilot, flying over an overgrown ridge, captured an image that would shake the entire town to its core. Before we go further, if this is your first time on this channel, we love you to hit the subscribe button, turn on notification, like, share and comment your thoughts below. The morning of April 14, 2010, began like any other in Maple Hollow, a town of fewer than 6,000 people tucked between rolling hills and dense Tennessee woodland. The locals prided themselves on knowing each other's routines. Everyone had their thing. For Amanda Frazier, that thing was running. Every morning, rain or shine, she left her small brick home on Willow Creek Road just before dawn. Headphones in, playlist cued, and the same route mapped in her head. Her friends used to joke that you could set your clock by Amanda's footsteps. That morning, though, the air felt different. Thick fog rolled low over the fields, and the forest seemed to swallow sound. Amanda laced up her running shoes, bright blue Nikes, a birthday gift from her fiancé, David. She kissed him on the forehead and whispered, "See you in a bit." Those were the last words he ever heard from her. 5:02 a.m., the start of the run. Amanda's smartwatch recorded her pace, a steady 8 minutes per mile. She turned onto Hollow Bend Trail, where the pavement gave way to dirt, and tree branches formed a canopy overhead. Her music thumped in her ears as the world began to wake around her. 2 deer startled in the brush. A motion light flicked on outside a farmhouse. Somewhere a dog barked. By 5:10 a.m., she reached the half-mile marker, passing the spot where a small wooden bridge crossed over Creekside Hollow, a shallow stream that cut through the woods. At 5:12 a.m., she waved to an early-rising neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, who was pulling her garbage can to the curb. Mrs. Delaney would later tell police that Amanda looked normal, cheerful, just like always. And then nothing. 6 a.m., missing time. When David woke up to the alarm, Amanda's side of the bed was cold. He smiled faintly, she'd probably taken a longer route. But when he went downstairs, her car keys and phone were still sitting by the door. Her coffee mug, untouched, sat under the coffee maker she always set on a timer. By 8:30 a.m., concern turned to fear. He called her phone, no answer. He called her best friend, Kelly Andrews. She hadn't heard from Amanda either. By 9:15, David drove along her usual running path, scanning ditches, side roads, and wooded shoulders. Nothing. When noon came and the hospital called to ask why Amanda hadn't shown up for her 12-hour shift, David's heart sank. He called 911. The search begins. The Maple Hollow Sheriff's Office treated it seriously from the start. Deputies were dispatched within the hour. By 2 p.m., local volunteers, neighbors, co-workers, church members, had gathered at the trailhead. Search dogs were brought in, drones were flown overhead, and the nearby creek was dragged. The only trace found was one bright blue running shoe, half buried in mud beside the creek's edge. But even that offered no clue. No blood. No footprints leading away. The dogs lost her scent within 30 feet. Investigators expanded the search area to a 2-mile radius. Still nothing. One deputy remarked later. It was like she'd been lifted off the earth. As night fell, floodlights illuminated the forest, and the sound of her name echoed through the fog. Amanda! Amanda, can you hear us? But there was only silence. The kind of silence that makes a town hold its breath. By the evening of April 14th, the word had spread across Maple Hollow like wildfire. Amanda Frazier is missing. Within hours, the town that prided itself on peace and safety became a command center of fear and confusion. Sheriff Tom Dillard, a veteran officer with 25 years on the force, stood at the trailhead with a flashlight in one hand and a radio in the other. The beam of light cut through the fog as volunteers in reflective vests lined up for instructions. "We're grid searching the perimeter first," Dillard said firmly. "No one goes alone. Keep your eyes open for anything: clothing, jewelry, footprints, tire tracks. Anything." The group nodded, solemnly clutching their flashlights. For many of them, Amanda wasn't just a name. She was a friend, a nurse who'd patched up their kids, or the smiling face from the grocery store. The volunteers. More than 150 people showed up that first night. Farmers, teachers, teenagers, even the pastor from Maple Hollow Baptist. They trudged through mud and bramble, calling Amanda's name until their voices cracked. But as the hours ticked by, the optimism faded. The fog thickened. Flashlights dimmed. And still there was nothing. At the edge of the creek, David knelt in the mud beside the blue running shoe they'd found earlier. He picked it up with trembling hands, whispering her name over and over. "We'll find you, Mandy. I promise." Kelly, Amanda's best friend, stood a few feet away, tears streaking her dirt-smeared face. "She wouldn't just disappear," she muttered. "Something happened out here." The theories start. By the next morning, media vans lined Willow Creek Road. Local news anchors delivered live updates as drone footage of the woods filled screens across Tennessee. Everyone had a theory. Some said Amanda had been abducted, a jogger targeted by a stranger. Others whispered darker things, that she'd staged her disappearance, run away, or even taken her own life. But those who knew her best rejected that. Amanda was grounded, devoted, and had plans: a wedding in 2 months, a promotion at the hospital, and a new house under construction. She wasn't the kind of person to walk away. Still, Sheriff Dillard couldn't ignore the chilling reality. They had no suspect, no vehicle sightings, and no leads. Forensics combed through Amanda's phone, laptop, and emails. Everything was normal. Her last text, sent at 4:47 a.m., was to David. "Heading out now, Red Heart, see you for breakfast." After that, digital silence. The Creekside discovery. 2 days later, search teams found something else. A scrap of reflective fabric snagged on a barbed wire fence deep in the woods, about half a mile off her running route. It matched the material of Amanda's running jacket. Investigators marked the area, bringing in cadaver dogs. But again, nothing. No scent trail, no remains, no drag marks. The fence stood at the edge of private land belonging to Howard Brinks, a reclusive mechanic with a long history of trespassing complaints. When deputies knocked on his door, Brinks seemed startled but cooperative. "Yeah, I heard all the fuss," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I ain't seen nobody run through my property." They searched his shed, his truck, and the woods behind his house clean. No signs of Amanda. Brinks' name eventually faded from the suspect list, but the unease lingered. The emotional toll. Days turned into weeks. Posters of Amanda's face, smiling, bright-eyed, covered telephone poles, gas stations, and grocery doors. The town held candlelight vigils at the courthouse. Children drew signs that said, "Come home, Amanda." David barely slept. He spent his days in the woods, retracing her route again and again, clinging to the faint hope that he'd find something everyone else missed. Kelly visited him often, though the grief had carved deep lines into her once vibrant face. "You have to rest," she said one evening as they sat by the creek. David shook his head. "I'll rest when she's home." But Amanda wasn't coming home. Not that week, not that month, not that year. And as summer turned to fall, Maple Hollow began to realize something terrible. Whatever had taken Amanda that morning was still out there. By the time the calendar turned to May 2010, Maple Hollow had become a town divided, not by hate, but by haunting curiosity. Everyone had a version of what they thought happened to Amanda Frazier. And every version seemed to make the town's quiet nights a little darker. The rumors begin. At Millie's Diner, where locals gathered for breakfast and gossip, Amanda's name dominated every conversation. One theory claimed a truck driver passing through town had grabbed her. Another insisted someone close to her, maybe even David, knew more than he was saying. "I'm telling you," one regular whispered over coffee, "those cases always start at home." David heard the rumors. He saw the side glances in the grocery store, the pity in people's eyes. But the thing that broke him most wasn't suspicion, it was the emptiness. The feeling of waking up each morning and realizing she was still gone. He stopped working. He stopped eating. Most days he'd just drive aimlessly, following any new rumor, any false lead, as if determination alone could pull Amanda back from the void. The investigation stalls. By June, the sheriff's office had followed every trail they could find, from ex-boyfriends to distant relatives, even a delivery driver who'd worked Amanda's route. All dead ends. The FBI became involved briefly, reviewing the evidence, but their assessment was grim. No signs of abduction, no ransom demand, no digital trail. This is a true disappearance. The lead investigator, Sheriff Dillard, spoke to reporters once in late summer. We're missing something. Either she ran into someone she knew, or this was someone who knew her routine well enough to intercept her. Those words chilled the town to its core. Someone knew Amanda's schedule, her routes, her habits, her time of day. Someone from Maple Hollow itself. The obsession takes hold. In small towns, mysteries never die, they just evolve. A Facebook group called Find Amanda Frazier gathered over 20,000 members within months, with online sleuths analyzing every rumor, every scrap of footage. People dissected the 5:12 a.m. camera clip of her jogging, zooming in, adjusting brightness, claiming to see a shadowy figure behind her. But experts dismissed it as digital artifacting. Still, the obsession spread like wildfire. Psychics mailed letters to the sheriff claiming visions of Amanda near a body of water. Others swore they'd seen her in neighboring towns. The sheriff's office followed up on more than 300 tips, and none led anywhere. David under scrutiny. By late summer, David became a focus of quiet suspicion. Detectives interviewed him multiple times. His alibi, being asleep at home, was weak but consistent. His phone records matched his story. No evidence tied him to her disappearance. Yet whispers persisted. Why was he so composed on the 911 call? Why hadn't he taken a polygraph immediately? He did eventually and passed. But the cloud of doubt never lifted. The pressure fractured him. He withdrew from friends, stopped attending church, and sold the home he'd shared with Amanda. By Christmas, he was living in a one-bedroom apartment near Nashville, rarely seen and rarely speaking. Years began to pass. The case grew cold. New missing persons filled the headlines. Maple Hollow tried to move on, but it never truly did. The town's annual charity 5K run was renamed the Amanda Frazier Memorial Run. A bench with her name engraved sat near the trail where she vanished. Every year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, people gathered there, candles in hand, faces lit with the same desperate question. What happened to Amanda? And yet life went on. Kids grew up. Businesses changed. The trail became overgrown. Her name became a ghost story parents told to warn their children. Don't go jogging alone before sunrise. The uneasy decade. For 10 years, Amanda Frazier existed only in memory and speculation. Until one summer morning in 2020, when a man named Ethan Cole, a hobbyist drone pilot testing his new camera rig over the old Hollow Bend Trail, saw something unusual. Something that shimmered faintly beneath the trees near the creek bend. Something metallic. Something that didn't belong. And with that, Maple Hollow's darkest mystery was about to reopen. 10 years. That's how long the town of Maple Hollow had lived under a shadow. For most people, time heals. But for Maple Hollow, time only deepened the mystery. The old trail where Amanda vanished, once alive with morning joggers and kids on bikes, had become a forbidden place. Locals crossed the street to avoid it. Teenagers dared each other to go there at night. The forest had reclaimed the path, vines strangling the wooden bridge, moss creeping up the old creek banks. Only the faint outlines of Amanda's memorial bench remained visible under the weeds. A town frozen in time. By 2020, the world had changed, technology advanced, social media grew, but in Maple Hollow it still felt like 2010. Every so often, someone new to town would see the missing posters still taped to the gas station's wall and ask, "Who is she?" And someone old enough to remember would lower their voice and say, "Amanda Frazier. The girl who went running and never came back." David Morrow never left Tennessee. He'd moved to Nashville, got a job managing logistics for a medical company, but his life had lost all color. He never remarried. His apartment walls were bare except for one framed photo, Amanda in her running gear, smiling at the starting line of a local 5K, sun shining on her face. Every April, David drove back to Maple Hollow. He'd stand at the edge of Hollow Bend Trail, flowers in hand, staring into the fog like he expected her to step out any second. Kelly still lived in town. She'd married, had 2 kids, and opened a daycare, but Amanda's absence lingered in her heart like unfinished business. Every so often, she'd dream of Amanda calling her name, always from somewhere deep in the woods. Always just out of reach. New faces, old wounds. Sheriff Dillard had retired in 2018, still haunted by the unsolved case that defined his career. The new sheriff, Marla Jensen, was younger, sharp, tech-savvy, and determined to modernize the department. She inherited dozens of cold cases, but the Frazier file sat at the top of her desk. "It's more than a file," she told her deputies. "It's the town's ghost." And that ghost was about to stir again. Ethan Cole's flight. It was June 2, 2020, a humid summer morning. Ethan Cole, a 32-year-old IT technician from Knoxville, had come to Maple Hollow to visit family. He'd recently bought a high-resolution drone with night vision and thermal imaging, his latest hobby during the lockdown. That morning, he decided to test it over the forested ridge near Creekside Hollow, a stretch locals warned him about. But to Ethan, it was just a pretty landscape. He launched the drone from an open field, guiding it smoothly over the treeline. On his tablet screen, the live feed showed winding creeks, overgrown trails, and tangled vegetation. Then something caught his eye. At the edge of a thicket, just beyond the old bridge, was a gleam of metal, dull and half-buried under years of leaves. He hovered closer, adjusting the angle. The shape was wrong for scrap. It was curved, almost like part of a vehicle frame. Curiosity piqued, Ethan took multiple still shots. When he reviewed them later that evening, his heart skipped. One photo clearly showed a license plate, faded, but legible enough to make out part of the number. The call that changed everything. At first, Ethan thought nothing of it. Old wrecks littered rural Tennessee. But something about the location nagged at him. He Googled Maple Hollow missing jogger. And the first result froze him. A decade-old article, headline bold across the screen. Amanda Frazier missing since 2010, last seen near Creekside Hollow Trail. Ethan's hands trembled as he looked back at the drone photo. The coordinates matched almost exactly. He sent the images to the Maple Hollow Sheriff's Office. Within hours, Sheriff Jensen had mobilized a small team to secure the site. The next morning, deputies, forensic techs, and a recovery unit moved into the woods. After 10 years of silence, Amanda's case had reopened. Return to the woods. By dawn, the woods buzzed with the sounds of generators, radios, and boots crunching through undergrowth. A tarp was stretched over the area as forensic teams dug through years of earth and debris. Sheriff Jensen stood beside the corroded frame of what looked like a small hatchback vehicle, half buried near the creek. The trunk was twisted inward, as if it had hit something hard before sliding down the slope. And inside, under layers of silt, rust, and decay, were fragments of human remains. The detective whispered, "It's her, it has to be her." A piece of jewelry was recovered first, a delicate silver bracelet engraved with one word: hope. Amanda's family had given her that bracelet on her 21st birthday. After a decade of mystery, Maple Hollow finally had something more than memories. They had evidence, and that evidence would soon unravel the truth no one was ready for. When word spread that something had been found in the woods near Creekside Hollow, the town of Maple Hollow came alive like it hadn't in years. By noon, cars lined the dirt road. People stood behind yellow tape, watching deputies move in and out of the trees. Some whispered, some cried. For a decade, this case had been a wound that never healed. And now it had been ripped open again. The excavation. Sheriff Marla Jensen stood at the edge of the dig site, the morning sun glinting off the drone operator's tablet beside her. The drone footage looped silently on screen, the metallic outline buried under the forest floor, slowly revealed as investigators worked. By mid-afternoon, the rusted skeleton of a 2009 Honda Fit had been carefully extracted from the mud. The car was barely recognizable, its once silver paint flaked to dull brown. Inside, forensic techs moved methodically. Every inch mattered, every fragment told part of the story. From the passenger seat, they retrieved a torn piece of reflective fabric, matching the running jacket Amanda wore that morning. From the floorboard, a single earbud, fused from heat and moisture. But it was what they found wedged between the driver's seat and console that silenced everyone. A house key attached to a purple lanyard embroidered with her initials, AF. And then in the back seat, they uncovered a partial skeleton, still seated, still belted in. The medical examiner confirmed what the town had both hoped and dreaded to hear. The remains are consistent with a female, approximately 28 years old. David's call. When the sheriff's office called David Morrow, he didn't speak for nearly a full minute. Just the sound of his breath, sharp, unsteady. Then, quietly, "You found her, didn't you?" The sheriff hesitated before answering. We believe so, David. But we'll need DNA confirmation. He drove to Maple Hollow that same night, headlights cutting through the familiar fog. For the first time in 10 years, he felt the ache of hope and fear at the same time. The scene reconstruction. By the next morning, state investigators joined the local team. The working theory was simple and horrifying. The car had veered off the old dirt access road, likely in the early morning hours of her disappearance. Heavy rain the night before had softened the soil. The vehicle slid down a steep embankment, smashing through underbrush before landing nose first in the creek bed. The force of impact likely ruptured the fuel line, flooding the interior. The car had landed in a deep pocket of mud and silt, effectively sealing it beneath the surface for years. Seasonal flooding, moss growth, and vegetation concealed the wreck completely. From above, the ground appeared undisturbed, until Ethan's drone caught the faint glint of exposed metal 10 years later. But something about the findings didn't sit right with Sheriff Jensen. Amanda wasn't supposed to be driving that morning. Her shoes were found on the trail. Her smartwatch recorded her run. So how had she ended up in her car? Half a mile from where she'd last been seen jogging? The inconsistency. The trailhead where Amanda disappeared and the crash site didn't connect by any paved road. Investigators pulled old town planning maps and discovered that, back in 2010, a logging access path had existed between the 2 points, now long overgrown. But still, how did she get from running on foot to driving her car in the opposite direction? And then came a chilling clue. A fingerprint preserved by time and heat, found on the inside of the passenger side window. It didn't match Amanda. The print was partial, but distinctive enough for forensics to flag it as male. The second discovery. When divers searched the creek below the embankment, they found another piece of evidence that rewrote the narrative. A cell phone, its casing cracked and algae-coated, still sealed in a waterproof running pouch. When recovered and dried, the SIM card data was analyzed. The last ping registered at 5:16 a.m., mere minutes after Amanda was last seen jogging. The GPS coordinates? Exactly between the trail bend and the logging road. Her final recorded movement. A sudden drop in altitude, followed by complete stop. It was the digital equivalent of a scream frozen in time. Media frenzy. As news broke, national outlets flooded into Maple Hollow. Missing jogger found after a decade. Drone uncovers mystery of Amanda Frazier. Cameras swarmed the sheriff's office, and true crime bloggers dissected every new clue in real time. But Sheriff Jensen wasn't ready to call it an accident. Not yet. Something about that scene feels deliberate, she told her team quietly. She didn't just drive herself into a creek. She wasn't wrong. The investigation was about to take a much darker turn. One that would expose betrayal, obsession, and a truth that would shake Maple Hollow forever. The day after Amanda Frazier's remains were confirmed, Maple Hollow felt like it had aged all over again. The fog hung low, the roads were quiet, and for a moment, it seemed as if time had turned back to 2010. But now there were answers, just not the ones anyone expected. The forensic picture. The State Forensics Division took custody of the recovered vehicle. They began an exhaustive reconstruction of the events leading up to the crash. Tire impressions around the site revealed something disturbing. 2 separate tread patterns, one belonging to Amanda's Honda Fit, and another from a different vehicle, likely a pickup truck or SUV, based on the tire width and spacing. The second set of tracks ended abruptly near the edge of the embankment. To Sheriff Marla Jensen, that meant one thing. Amanda's car didn't go over by accident. It had been pushed. DNA and fingerprints. When the fingerprint lifted from the passenger window came back from the lab, Jensen's suspicion hardened. The match? Howard Brinks. The same reclusive mechanic whose property bordered the trail. The man questioned in 2010 and cleared for lack of evidence. His prints were still in the system from an old trespassing charge. It was the break Jensen needed, but it also opened a floodgate of new questions. Why would Howard have been inside Amanda's car? What connection did they even have? Investigators obtained a new warrant and searched Brinks's property again, this time with ground-penetrating radar and a fine-toothed forensic team. The second search. Brinks's house sat like a relic of neglect. Peeling paint, weeds climbing the porch rail, a rusting truck on cinder blocks out front. He'd grown older, frilier, but his eyes still held that wary glint when deputies arrived. "You already searched this place," he said, voice rough as gravel. "And we're doing it again," Jensen replied evenly. In his garage, buried under scrap metal, investigators found a box of old car parts, mostly junk. But tucked beneath a rag were two small items sealed in a plastic bag. A women's watch, its band cracked but recognizable, and a silver necklace engraved with the initials AF. Howard insisted he'd found them years ago near the creek and kept them just in case. But the watch's serial number matched Amanda's smartwatch, the same one her parents had gifted her before her 2010 marathon. Interrogation. In the sterile light of the interview room, Brinks shifted uneasily, his weathered hands trembling. "You're saying I killed her?" "You got no proof of that," he muttered. Sheriff Jensen leaned forward, her voice calm but sharp. "Howard, your fingerprints are inside her car. Her belongings were found on your property. And your truck's tire impressions matched the ones at the crash site." He looked down, shaking his head slowly. "That's impossible. I didn't touch her." But Jensen had already pieced together a narrative that made chilling sense. The 2010 morning. Witness statements from that time mentioned seeing a white pickup driving near the trail entrance around dawn, a detail dismissed back then because it was so common. But Howard owned one. Forensics confirmed flecks of white automotive paint transferred to Amanda's car near the rear bumper, consistent with a low-speed impact. The evidence painted a horrifying picture. Amanda had finished her run, possibly heading back to her car parked near the old access road. Howard, who lived nearby and was known to patrol his property at odd hours, may have confronted her, maybe accusing her of trespassing, maybe something worse. A confrontation turned into a chase. A chase turned into a collision. Her car, struck from behind, careened down the embankment, disappearing into the creek where time buried the truth for 10 years. But one question remained. If it was an accident or panic, why hadn't Howard come forward? Jensen asked him directly. "If you didn't mean to hurt her, why didn't you call for help?" For a long moment he just stared at the table. Then he whispered, "Because I thought I killed her." He said he'd watched her car slide down the slope and heard the crash. He ran to the edge, saw the water rushing over it, and panicked. He was already on probation for property damage. He knew no one would believe it was an accident. So he left. He never returned to that spot. And over the years, the forest covered his sin. The confession. While he never used the word murder, his statement was enough. Prosecutors charged Howard Brinks, now 62, with manslaughter and obstruction of justice. He died of a stroke in county custody just 3 months later, before the trial began. But the truth, at least most of it, had finally surfaced. Or so everyone thought. Because when the final autopsy report came back, it revealed a detail that turned the case on its head. A detail that even Howard's confession couldn't explain. Amanda's cause of death wasn't blunt force trauma. It was asphyxiation. She had been alive when her car hit the creek. When the final autopsy report landed on Sheriff Marla Jensen's desk, the entire investigation shifted. For 10 years, everyone had believed Amanda's disappearance was either a tragic accident or an impulsive crime. But the report revealed something no one had expected, something that didn't fit with Howard Brinks' story. Amanda hadn't died on impact. She had drowned, but not from the creek water. Her lungs were filled with clean water, no silt, no mud, no algae. That meant one thing. She'd been submerged somewhere else first. The impossible detail. Forensic pathologist Dr. Kellerman laid it out clearly in her briefing. If she went into the creek in that car, she'd have inhaled dirty water. We'd find traces of sediment. But her lungs were clean. Someone drowned her in a controlled source, like a tub or tank, before staging the crash. The room went silent. Jensen felt the air thicken as the implications sank in. Howard Brinks couldn't have done that. His confession didn't fit the evidence. He might have been guilty of something, hiding, panicking, but the real killer was still out there. Re-examining the timeline, Jensen reopened every piece of evidence. She reviewed every witness statement, every call, every timestamp. And then one overlooked detail stood out. The missing 10-minute gap between Amanda's last sighting and her car's GPS ping. In that gap, her smartwatch had disconnected from her phone. The devices only desynced when separated by distance, roughly half a mile apart. Meaning someone had likely intercepted her on foot, taken her toward the road, and then forced her into the car. The question was, who had access to her route, and her schedule? And then a name resurfaced from the old case files. Kelly Andrews, Amanda's best friend. The best friend's secret. Kelly had been there every day during the original search. She'd cried on camera, organized vigils, helped David hand out flyers. But buried in an old interview transcript from 2010 was an offhand comment that now struck Jensen as odd. Kelly had said she'd tried calling Amanda around 5 that morning, but records showed no outgoing calls from her phone. Why lie about something so small? Investigators quietly re-interviewed her. Now in her late 30s, Kelly appeared nervous, defensive. She repeated how close they'd been, how she'd never stop missing Amanda. But when Jensen brought up the new forensics, her composure cracked. "You're saying she didn't die in that creek?" Kelly asked softly. Jensen nodded. "That's right. We think someone drowned her somewhere else. Somewhere private." Kelly looked away, tears forming. Her hands trembled. And then she whispered, "You don't understand. I was trying to protect her. The hidden affair." Through a series of follow-up interviews, the truth finally surfaced. Amanda had confided in Kelly weeks before her disappearance that she was having doubts about her engagement to David. She'd discovered he'd been messaging a co-worker. Nothing explicit, but enough to shake her trust. Kelly, fiercely loyal, had confronted David behind Amanda's back, warning him to come clean before he lost everything. But David hadn't told Amanda. He'd kept the secret. And worse, there was something between David and Kelly that no one had seen. Old social media data recovered from David's deleted accounts showed dozens of late-night messages to Kelly, flirty, emotional, blurred lines between friendship and something more. The texts stopped abruptly 2 days before Amanda vanished. The confrontation. Detectives brought David in again. 10 years had aged him, but guilt had hollowed him out far deeper. Jensen placed the forensic report in front of him. "We know she was drowned somewhere else, David. You were the last person to see her alive. You want to tell me what really happened that morning?" He stared down at the report for what felt like forever, jaw tight, hands trembling. Then, without looking up, he said quietly, "It was supposed to be just a talk." He explained that he'd met Amanda on the trail that morning, something he'd never admitted. She'd texted him the night before, saying she wanted to clear the air. They argued, about the messages, about trust, about starting over. He claimed Amanda stormed off toward her car. He followed her, still yelling. When she got inside, he tried to stop her from driving away. She shoved him, and in a panic, he grabbed her arm. She fought back. In the struggle, she hit her head on the doorframe, fell unconscious. He panicked. "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean for it to happen," he whispered. According to his statement, he carried her to the Creek house, an old cabin his uncle once owned, less than a mile away, now abandoned. There was an old rainwater tank behind it. He filled it with water, submerged her body, hoping to make it look like she'd drowned accidentally. Then he staged the crash, pushing her car into the ravine using a winch from the back of his truck. The print on the passenger window, the one thought to be Brinks's, had actually been misclassified. Under reanalysis, it matched David Morrow. 10 years of silence. 10 years of deception. The man everyone pitied, the man who cried at every vigil, had killed her. The arrest. David Morrow was arrested in August 2020 for second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. His trial lasted 8 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Kelly Andrews testified tearfully, admitting she'd suspected David's involvement, but never had proof. Her guilt had kept her tied to the case all these years, volunteering, grieving, trying to atone for her silence. And when the verdict was read, she said one simple line that echoed through the courtroom. "I thought I knew my best friend's soulmate, but he was the reason she never came home." 10 years. That's how long it took for the truth to claw its way out of the silence. Amanda Frazier's disappearance wasn't the kind of mystery born in darkness. It was a tragedy built in daylight, right under the eyes of those who loved her most. The town of Maple Hollow will never forget her name. Every year, on April 14th, a small group gathers at the trailhead, the place where she was last seen alive. They leave flowers, running shoes, and handwritten notes on the wooden post that now bears her memorial plaque. The inscription reads, "Her last run ended in silence, but her story kept running until truth found its breath." David's prison years. Inside the Tennessee State Penitentiary, David Morrow reportedly keeps to himself. In a rare interview, he said he still dreams of that morning, the argument, the scream, the silence that followed. "I see her face every day," he told reporters. "The guilt is louder than any cell door." He's eligible for parole in 2045, but locals doubt he'll ever return to Maple Hollow, the town that changed. After the case closed, the trail where Amanda vanished was renamed Frazier Run. New security cameras, emergency beacons, and local patrols were added, changes that might save lives now, born from the loss of one. Sheriff Jensen retired shortly after, saying the case had taken something she couldn't get back. But before leaving, she gave one final statement to the press. Justice doesn't always come quickly. Sometimes it waits for the right moment to be seen. And when it finally shows up, it asks one question: were you ready to face it? A legacy that echoes. Amanda's story became more than a local tragedy. It became a cautionary tale about control, silence, and the illusion of perfection. To outsiders, her life seemed complete: a steady job, a loving fiancé, a bright future. But behind closed doors, the truth was fragile. Her mother once said in an interview, "She ran every morning to clear her mind. I just wish she could have run away from him." It's the kind of statement that leaves a mark, a reminder that evil doesn't always wear a stranger's face. Sometimes it's the person waiting at home. And that's the story of Amanda Frazier, a woman whose morning run became a decade-long mystery that tore a small town apart, until truth finally surfaced from the depths. If stories like this remind you how fragile trust can be, how easily ordinary moments can turn into headlines, make sure to stay aware, stay curious, and most of all, stay safe. This is Unmasked Crime, where we uncover the real stories that shake the quietest corners of the world. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Until next time. Thanks for watching.